Hello and welcome to Ancient Art of Fishing. Today, instead of going on an adventure because it's thunderstorming outside, I'm going to do a video about where to take your kids fishing to keep them interested. Now, as a general rule, the first couple of times you take your kid fishing, you do not want to take them flathead fishing, and you do not want to take them muskie fishing. You want something that will keep their interest, that they can actually catch fish right away. So I have a list of roughly 7 places around the Madison area, and I'll throw like an 8th one in because the 8th pond got dredged a few years back. I'm not really sure if there's any fish in it, but these 7 places that are not all that crowded most of the time and have decent access, and fish are readily biting. These 7 places you can take your kids and they'll have some fun catching some small fish. I'll also tell you what fish there actually is in the water at these places. So the first place is Elmer Park. Now, Elmer Park actually has 2 ponds, as you can see on the screen, this one and this one. We're going to focus on the smaller one. The bigger pond actually has more interesting fish, but it's very hard to access in the summer and the warmer months because there's grass growing everywhere, and some of the land is private property. The smaller pond is all public, and there's access right off the parking area. And what's in this pond, there's bullheads and sunfish. I don't know if there's bass or not. I have never caught a bass in this pond, so it's not that exciting for like you and me, obviously. But it's exciting for little kids to catch a sunfish. What you want to do is basically just toss either a waxy or a piece of worm on a small hook under a bobber, and you will get a small green sunfish. If you want the bullheads, toss a worm under a bigger hook into the center of the pond as far as you can cast it, and you will probably get a bullhead catfish. There's small bullheads in there. They're not that big. So Elmer Park is the first place I would actually recommend that you take your kids, because really it's very fast to get a couple of fish, and that'll get their interest in fishing. Like I said, if you take your kid the first time to fish for like trophy fish, they're going to hate it most of the time because you're probably going to catch 1 or 2 fish all day. It's just a lot of sitting around in the boat and waiting, and little kids generally don't like that. So the second place is actually Goose Lake. Now, Goose Lake is actually in the Verona area. It's right here, as we can see. So the thing is, like, you don't want to park at Quarry Ridge because that's like a mile walk. You want to park at Pleasant Lane. So basically on Google Maps, you would look up Goose Lake Drive, go to the end, turn on to Pleasant Lane, and there's like a little parking spot at the end. There's a little hiking trail, and that gets you to pretty much the only accessible spot on Goose Lake. Now, the only accessible spot on Goose Lake, that's actually like, it's not very much fish, so usually there's like no one there. So what you want to do is like you basically want to use either a gulp minnow under a small jig about a foot under the bobber, or wax worms would work as well. So essentially, like, you will catch bullheads, crappie sometimes, and bluegills. Bluegills will be probably the majority, but you will catch some small bullheads, and there are crappie. There are bass in this lake. I've actually caught bass in this lake too, but they're not as numerous as the others. And there is an odd pike or two in this lake, but I've actually never caught a pike. So Goose Lake is the other easy access place. And like I said, these places generally aren't very crowded. Like, they're not like Tenny Park, which is always crowded. And Tenny's bluegills, honestly, are used to being fished. They don't really bite all that often. These bluegills at these places, I'm telling you, they readily bite, and they will readily bite just about anything. I've caught many, many fish at all these places. Also, across the road at this Nesbitt Pond place, there's like carp, bass, and bluegills, but the access is a little bit harder. It's really like wildly overgrown in the summer around the pond. Goose Lake, there's always an access area where it's not too much overgrown. So Goose Lake is going to be the second place. Lake Wingra is basically very well known, and it is kind of crowded, but there's always a place for people to fish at Lake Wingra. And like Lake Wingra, I find the fish near Tenny Park. Not Tenny Park, I mean near the Henry Villa Zoo. You can fish in the lagoon. I've caught fish in there as well. But generally, like, I don't fish at Wingra Dam. That's always very crowded. Like, near this like little beach place and this kayak launch, there's always a lot of panfish just sitting in the shallows. They will bite literally anything. I think worms is best, but I've caught plenty of them with like bits of KFC under a bobber, essentially like a bit of a chicken nugget under a bobber. I've caught plenty of those bluegills. Lake Wingra's bluegills are always kind of stunted because it's overpopulated. You're not going to catch any big bluegills, but it will keep kids interested. Now, if you're interested in fishing Lake Wingra, there is definitely bass in there. There's also muskie in there. I would actually just go and fish Wingra Creek, which is pretty easy access as well if you're going to go for muskie. And there's some bowfins around like right a little bit below the dam as well. So if you want big fish, that's where it is. But if you want like your kids to to stay interested in and like fishing, then this area next to the beach and the kayak area, there's always like small bluegills, and there is crappies as well. And every once in a while, you will actually get a bass bite. The bass are decent size in here, but the bluegills are stunted. But if your kid's just trying to enjoy fishing, that's a great place. So Lake Wingrove would actually be the third place. The fourth place I'm going to mention is McKee Farms Park. Now, McKee Farms Park has 3 ponds. The one closest to this one, to the parking lot, this outer part to Fitchburg Days place, I'm not a huge fan of. The access, honestly, here isn't great over the summer. This north pond and the south pond are probably better. The north pond has more access, but I think it's like really, really overgrown in the summer. There is this pipe discharge place where you can actually kind of like stand there and cast, and there's always a lot of bluegills near that discharge. They range in size from tiny to pretty good, like 7-inch gills. So, and there's bass there too. So at this place around the McKee Farms area, at this discharge pipe, I've caught both bluegills and bass, and they bite pretty readily. The depth of which you have to fish with worms or a jig under a bobber, I would say 8 inches to a foot, probably the best depth of fish. You will definitely get some fish there. The actual channel between the 2 ponds is actually pretty good early summer before it gets too overgrown with algae. There is a decent amount of carp. You can actually fish with corn in there, and you will get a decent amount of carp. The south pond is actually pretty good too. It has carp, bullheads, and bluegills as well as bass. I've only caught bass in the north pond, but I have caught carp and carp goldfish hybrids, as well as bullheads and bluegills in the south pond. And McKee Farms Park is usually not too crowded. Usually when I go there, whether it's weekday or weekend, I am the only one fishing there. The fifth place I'm going to tell you guys is Lakeview Park, and this is right next to Lake Mendota. Now, it's actually much easier to catch things in Lakeview than Mendota Marshall Park next door. And there's several fishing docks, and that's where you want to fish from in Lakeview Park. So you want to go off one of these fishing docks. In the summer, the water is usually decently clear, and you can actually see gills just off the dock. Obviously, if you just put like a small piece of KFC or a small worm under a hook, they will readily bite it. There, you can actually see bass a little further out, and you can actually catch bass there. I think the bluegills there are a little bit too big for you to use as bass bait generally, but you can actually catch plenty of bluegills in Lakeview Park just by using any kind of meat bait under a bobber. And it's very, very easy access. There's parking, there's trails all the way around the lake, so kids will have a lot of fun fishing there. The next one is actually, I think, a favorite of mine. It's Middleton Hills Park. And Middleton Hills, I generally fish in the spring, but in the summer the water is warmer, so there's going to be fish in there. Now, Middleton Hills is kind of special because I haven't caught any bass or bluegills in there. I'm pretty sure there's probably bullheads in there, but what I've caught the most there is goldfish. There is a big supply of goldfish, especially in the place where like the channel kind of curves. Not in the pond. You don't want to fish the pond itself. The pond is like super shallow, but the actual channel around the pond where it curves, that is actually a really good place. I've actually made a video about that. There's many, many goldfish in there. I don't think there's actually largemouth bass in there, but if you want to catch a couple of goldies, or if you want your kid to have fun catching some goldies, just use a slightly smaller hook, piece of worm, you will catch some goldfish. Very interesting place to fish. You might want to catch some for the aquarium, but you can't actually do that in Wisconsin. They don't allow you to take fish because of VHS disease from the water you actually fishing from to your aquarium. I don't like that rule, but it is what it is, and you got to follow the rules. So Middleton Hills Park. And if you're wondering where Middleton Hills Park on the map is, it is actually very, very close to Pheasant Branch Conservatory. So this is like Middleton Hills Park, and you don't want to fish in the pond because the pond's super shallow. You want to fish like kind of close to where this drainage is right here on this side, and also like essentially like just the widest part of the channel. That's actually where you actually want to fish. The widest part of the channel surrounding the pond, not the pond itself. So that's Middleton Hills Park. The seventh one I'm going to mention is a little bit further out, actually. And it's actually called Lerner Conservation Park. And that's actually in Oregon, which is about 15, 20 miles away. And what you want to do is there's County Road CC that bisects two large ponds. Both the ponds have bullheads, carp, and bluegills. And in the pond that's like above CC, there's actually some pretty big carp. I think I've seen some like 12, 15 pounders there. You want to use corn to fish for those carp, but you will always be able to get bluegills and bullheads there. And as for parking, you can just park off the side of the road somewhere to the south, to the bottom of County Road CC, or you can just like park on the street in this neighborhood over here. But anyways, like these two ponds right here, they're really good for fishing for kids because you will easily be able to catch bluegills and bullheads. And if you want them to feel the tug of a larger fish, you will actually be able to catch a fairly decent sized carp from these ponds. Now there is another pond at the intersection of CC and Alpine Parkway. Usually it has a lot of like plant growth on it, but there are actually bass in that pond. I haven't fished that pond because it's a bit of a walk, but these two ponds right here on either side of County Road CC, very, very good and kid-friendly fishing. Catch fish really, really fast. And the last place I'm going to mention is Orchid Heights Park. It's right next to Pheasant Branch Conservatory, and there's a parking lot right there. There's two ponds. The one closer to the parking lot is much more accessible. The shoreline is much more accessible, and that's where I fish. You will actually notice kind of like a drainage canal going into that pond, and I generally fish around that drainage canal. Now, there's tiny little bluegills here, and you can always catch those. You don't even have to use a bobber. You just kind of like dip a piece of like fake wax worm into the water, any kind of meat, or a small piece of worm under a very small hook. The hooks you have to use are going to be very small, size 8 or below. You can hook a lot of small bluegills. There are also bullheads in here, so you can actually just throw a piece of worm on the bottom out in the middle of the pool, and you will actually get a bullhead. And there are a good healthy amount of 1 to 2 pound carps in here. And what that actually means is that if you want your kids to feel a bigger fish, bring some corn, a size 1 hook, and a sinker, and just throw in, and you will probably get a carp. There are bass in these ponds. I've actually caught bass fingerlings, so they just spawned this year, and I've seen some bass jump. And I've also caught a bass in one of these ponds earlier this year. So they are there, but there's not too many of them. It's kind of fun to use the smaller bluegills as bait. Bullheads and bass will both eat them. And I've actually had hooked several bullheads using tiny little bluegills as bait. The bullheads here aren't huge, but they're not like tiny either. So there's not a huge overpopulation of bullheads. There are a lot of them. The bluegills here are overpopulated. You won't find any really large bluegills here. But the small bluegills are excellent bait. Orchid Heights, usually people are playing like frisbee or basketball there. The fishing is not too crowded. I've never ever seen anyone fish there except for me. So that's like 8 solid places around Madison, which generally aren't very crowded. And you can take your kids to, and you can catch a fish within 5 minutes to keep their interest. And then once they get their interest catching small fish and they want to move up to bigger fish, maybe you can introduce them to spots on Lake Mendota, the Sugar River, or other places. The key is to actually keep your kids interested in fishing by going to places where they can easily catch fish. And then when they want to go up to bigger fish, then they have to learn patience. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and hope you have places to actually take your kids and catch some easy fish. All right, I will see you on the next fishing adventure.